Okay, we are on.
So, just some kind of like housekeeping type stuff.
Yeah,
Uh, like you're basically working up to having a live running version again, right?
correct.
Um, is that something that you want me to help with?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what is the best thing to help with. Um,
Mm,
I believe I can see a path to having a working version, so I'm not stuck or blocked. It's simply ironing out all the creases.
right, right. And it's probably like more work to write it down than it is to just do it, right? Because
Um, at this stage, yeah, especially given that I'm still um, shifting things about a bit just to make it all work.
yeah,
What
it's not a problem.
what
So
would
in the interim, like basically what I'm doing is reading, taking notes, drawing diagrams, just
okay?
things that I need to like get my own, like get it all to fit in my head, basically.
Yeah, yeah,
I will say, basically, I know this about myself. Like, I find it easier to understand a program that I was there from the first line of code than it is for me to understand a program that is already 50 or 100,000 lines in. Um,
absolutely.
but that's not going to stop me in this case because, like, the ideas I think are all the ones that we've been talking about.
All the same old thing, man.
Mhm.
It's the same old thing.
So, like, I don't have a lot to report on. I'm still basically just, I'm not even at a point where my notes are like consolidated enough to send them to you and ask questions or whatever.
Okay. Well, can I go through the how I've arranged the code bases
Yep,
and make
sounds
sure
good.
that we're pointing in the same direction, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so the monorepo is there because the packages I wanted to publish were first of all the core engine, where the engine is able to run in a browser or in a Node.js instance. Uh, the second package was DOS, which is the command line version, and the third package was WebDOS, which was the web version of DOS plus the engine plus the components you need to make a visual representation of a program that was written in the DOS framework.
Right. And supposing you get Interblock like back up to running through its own demo again, is that going to be sufficient for DOS and WebDOS to work again?
Yes.
So you haven't shifted the consuming API.
I will need to rejig those consuming APIs. I know that DOS works, sort of. Like I haven't tested all of the functions in DOS. Um, there is no automated check for all of DOS. Uh, Not sure how I would actually do it because it's really just calling functions that are inside the engine and presenting terminal output
Right.
while doing some formatting changes in between. It doesn't really do anything other than that.
Which
Um,
is which is good. It's a strong sign that you've built it the right way.
yeah, and so that definitely works. I may have broken it in the last few days, but I did get it working a few days ago, so that should be easy to fix up. WebDOS might need a little bit more jigging around because whilst the interface stayed approximately the same, uh, who knows until you've tested it again, I guess. I think it's the same. I just got to actually run through it and fix it up. The thing that might be different is the subscription model that was being used, so that the client knew that things had changed. Maybe that's altered. I'll have to check it.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. The client project?
Was a consumer of WebDOS that I used to make sure that WebDOS was producing a consumable library.
Or sorry, I guess consumer project. Yeah, okay. So it's like a test harness for the full, like all of the shells put together kind of thing.
Yeah, all the packages stacked wobbly on top of each other, and that is meant to be what you would make as a web developer.
Okay. Right on. So then diving into the, like, obviously interblock is the main area of focus right now, right?
Yep. And when I run, like, I use the tests as the entry point to the system, and that's how I've been loading it and running it and exercising it and testing different pieces. The web project within Interblock serves only to show that the packages load in a browser,
Right.
that it can actually make a block for itself in the browser. And once I've completed the work I'm doing today on IPFS storage, it will also check that you can store persistently in the browser and can reset the browser storage.
Right.
So that's
yeah. So naively, I kind of like, usually the first place I check in a package is the package.json. And it said that there was the main entry point, which I think is basically just load and export is what's happening there.
Load, export, and check if assert works.
Right. And then the only other scripts that I saw that were relevant were the ones that fire up that Vite demo. So I just kind of assumed that's what I was looking at. So do you, I see. So test here, you would put test and you would put the path to the test file you're running.
Yeah, typically the thing I use is watch. So I would do watch and then the name of the file, and then that would run that specific test file. Wallaby is the main runner that I use for instant feedback. That I guess I should put it in the package JSON, but it does auto configuration, so it doesn't. I'll add that in right now so that you actually can get a hint to it in the package JSON, but it is automatically configured. So I'll just put in the key Wallaby auto configure true.
So the first place there's tests here is the IPLD wrapper, and those are the tests you're kind of working through one at a time.
Sorry, where are you looking?
You said the other day in chat that the tests that you're running to get the system up are in the W008 IPLD test folder.
That's one set of tests. The tests that I'm running as of today are the full-blown engine tests. So those are in W300. The interpulse test is like that's pretty much the top of the stack. If the interpulse test passes, then things are good. The other major test is W301 CRM.test. All the places where I logged results was before I had automatic benchmarking set up, and I probably should just delete those things, but I just thought they're not. I just like to look at them and look how far things have come. So, I mean, yeah, I guess that can be deleted now. I think I'm kind of looking for, like, well, you know, if you tell me how, like, if there's a way you'd think makes more sense to lay this out.
Well, it's just, I'm still trying to wrap my head around the pieces, basically. So, like engine, interpulse loads up engine, engine loads up all the IPLD wrappers. It's pretty like sparse, really, in terms of structure. Like I don't think there's an easier way to lay it out.
Okay. So the general theory around interpulse is that interpulse is the ORM, or it's basically what is presented to the developer, and it gives you. Wait on a second. It loads the shell, which is a supplied covenant that has all the functions that you'd probably want as a developer. And it pulls that shell out of W212 system covenants. So the shell is pretty much the main. That's where the main functionality of the system comes from. Is from a covenant called the shell. The engine really just it'll execute anything following the rules of how pulses are produced, but the shell is where you get the specific functionality that gives us our characteristics. And DOS is basically just a terminal interface to that shell. Now, when the purpose of interpulse is that it primarily deals with paths, whereas the engine deals specifically with like chain IDs. So the shell is about taking a path and allowing you to interact with the system in that sense. The engine is just raw hashes and addressing, and it's the engine is the cyclical, the repeated mechanism. Its job is basically run till exhaustion. It includes the IPFS services, but interpulse is the thing that sits around the outside. That is what we present to the developer. Now, the distinction between those might seem a little weak, but at least it's strong enough that, like, I think it's a good idea to keep that distinction because it lets us shift either in a, like, the engine can be left sort of minimal to just do that sole purpose of basically squashing out any pending actions, processing all the actions and exhausting the engine so that it's like, look, I've got nothing left to do. That's kind of its job.
Right.
Whereas Interpulse sits there and is what the developer who has a user interaction with a user, that's what that part deals with.
It really doesn't seem like a blurry distinction to me at all. Like, especially putting it as like one deals with paths. Like, the paths means, like, when you're thinking in paths, you're thinking in terms of collections of things, right?
Yeah.
And when you're thinking in hashes, you're thinking of one thing, right?
In the entire universe, one and only one thing. Yeah.
So it's like macro and micro views on the same thing, basically.
Yeah, that's sort of that's the idea. I wish I had a cleaner way to describe that. I don't have a good place where all this type of information is put. I don't know offhand where I should. I started littering them just once you said you were going to be more involved. I started littering it around the place in little markdown documents inside each package folder.
Yeah.
But I'm up for a place or a system. Maybe it's in the docs folder, maybe it's in the website folder. I don't really know.
So for right now, I mean, I think the main thing that would be helpful for me is having seen kind of the three layers here, at least as far as Interpulse is concerned. Like, anytime I would think about adding new functionality to the system, I would be asking the question, like, on which of these three layers does this go? And I guess there's a fourth, which is user contributed code as well, right?
You
So
would
like,
you would almost certainly, any feature you add would touch all three layers.
right. Okay, so then that's a fifth, cross-cutting multiple different layers. If you know, like, to me, I think that like asking that question and having a coherent answer for it, like
Yeah.
100% of the time, it is a strong indicator that you've like created a clean separation of concerns.
Yeah, that it's been cut right.
Mhm.
Well, maybe a good exercise is to pick a piece of functionality, and then you can work through that exercise of where should it go and what would be altered, and then we'll test it out like that.
Mhm. So you're basically saying you're not particularly married to where everything is currently located.
I am married to a functioning system that is easy for people who aren't me to work on.
Right.
I am currently unwed.
Okay. um, just because, like, I'm probably also a little bit kind of poisoned is the wrong word, I guess, but like inundated with the information that like of how this is built from all the conversations we've had, and maybe I'm leaning towards like a certain layout too. When I look
Tell
at
me,
this,
well, look, tell me, I'm all for talking about alternative layouts and alternate ways to group things. I will surely have an opinion on it or some reasoning around it. Um,
right,
that's probably a really good exercise because it helps me see the mental model that you have and helps you see mine as well.
right,
We need the same mental model, basically.
yeah,
I'm convinced that the place we want to get to is the same, you and I.
yeah,
I think that we've come at it from 100 different angles over the years.
hmm
This particular angle that I have made here seems to have gotten the furthest by a long shot.
hmm um, yeah. So what I'm trying to say is like nothing looks wrong about this layout to me so far as I've checked into it. Basically, what I want to do is I want to like basically draw a diagram for myself of like what are the classes, and what does an
Cool.
object diagram look like when this is instanced, and there's
Yeah,
just like
cool.
and if it looks like the folders don't match either the class or the object structure, those are places that kind of stand out to me a little bit
Yep.
as like possibly indicating. And the other thing is, if there's a bunch of like helper functions floating around here and there, that usually means you haven't named things properly. But
Well, there's very few helper functions, so
yeah,
I'm glad if that's one of your metrics. I think this should pass.
yeah, like a code base that doesn't have the right um, zones inside of it for code to go live in is a code
Mm,
base that usually ends up like bloating with helper function files all over the place.
all over the place. Yeah. This so far it fits, but what I'm noticing now is that the crush system, or the way that uh, the translation is done between IPFS objects and these objects, is starting to show a bit of strain and starting to pop up with a few like exception type of fixes. So do this except when it's this, or do this except, and I that's always the translation, or the mapping between IPFS and our structured objects is always going to be contentious.
Yep.
Um, that's probably the part that I'm least pleased about. I know it needs to be there. I've made an implementation. It is reasonably performant. It works. I don't think it would be called pretty by anyone's means. And I think what happened is I strove for generality
hmm
because I knew that that was a way to get correctness. And then I had to make a bunch of exceptions as I realized our use cases were nuanced in several areas. And so then it went from general to leaning back to specific, and I'd like to get back to pure general because it should be able to be exported as an npm module that other people can consume to make their own ORM on top of IPFS. It should be exportable like that. It absolutely is not. It is highly bound to the structures we have here. That I think would be like the unstickying that would make me pleased again, is to have this like standalone set of ORM-ish things. Now, why make an ORM? There's one case at least where the user code needs to interact with our classes, and that is when they run the query use pulse. So when they do use pulse, they're expecting to get back a class of type pulse where that class is ours. That's not just raw data. That's not JSON. That's a class with functions that's loaded. Now, are there other places where they might like that? You know, maybe not from our system, but would they like to make their own classes? And when they ask the system for their object back, they get their class back. Maybe they want that. So that's sort of why, like, first of all, making an npm module that deals with this ORM style interface to IPFS is good because it proves that our system is clean and correct if it is general. But secondly, it might actually have some utility being standalone. If some other project can pick it up and use it, then at least they're looking for bugs and they're keeping features minimal and they're doing all that too. Yeah, that's where I'd like to get to there. Cost a bit of effort.
That's going to be your eternal struggle, probably, right? Like, unless you have like a fairly clear idea of what kind of memory structures you're always going to need to be able to build with our system, you know?
No, I do. I believe it's absolutely possible to present a single base class that has some 3 functions on it: crush, uncrush, and get diff. And you should be able to make any class structure you like out of that and have it be able to generate IPFS blocks that represent the difference between one tree and the next, and to also be able to persist to IPFS and then re-inflate back to objects.
Right.
That's what I'm aiming for. I'm sort of steering towards that. It's kind of that, but it's kind of not as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's a good chunk of code in here in the IPLD stuff, which is, I assume, where the friction is coming from, right?
Not really, actually. The only, like, if you look at utils, which was the helper function, I could basically delete utils. It's so small, I don't even need it. I don't even use deep freeze anymore because I was like YOLO. But in the source folder, the only real things that I'd pull out would be IPLD interface and IPLD struct. And those are the ones that are sort of, that's the pain point, because that's the way that that defines the behavior of the model system. Every other class here, I'm sort of happy with, because it was what was spec'd in the schema definition from W6, which was that the markdown doc that describes the behavior using IPLD structures. This is just the implementation of every single one of those listed in that markdown file.
Right.
And so the behaviors of these things is more to do with our domain problems as opposed to the problems with the interaction between IPFS. So assuming that I had a good clean ORM with IPFS, these other classes I would be very happy with because I feel like they describe our problem domain nicely.
Right. So, like, what would you say if it's not your binding, like your low level binding to IPFS and IPLD, that's like causing friction? What would you say is causing friction with the like crush and uncrush idea? Like, I'm with you. I don't think having
the
sorry.
fidelity of it, like crushing down and then getting back and making sure I got the same thing under all possible operating circumstances. That's where the last week worth of bugs has come from. Like, hey, how come I crushed this and stored it in IPFS, and then I tried to resuscitate it, and it's different now. Which sounds like a stupid problem, and it is a stupid problem. It's just complicated because it's not. I haven't made a pure layer. It's sort of like tried to be pure and then got a bunch of exceptions, and I'm like, meh, help. Like, but it can be pure. I'm convinced it can be pure. I just should probably take the time to split it out and build it up as a pure thing with pure tests and then reintegrate it back in, but in a hurry. So what do you do, right? Push forwards with the rickety solution you've got because it can get to the end, or take the time to do it properly?
So, I mean, ultimately, the answer to that question for me is, does it compromise like security?
The answer is maybe.
Okay,
And
then it's probably worth spending time on.
Well, depends on. So the security model for the first deployment, keeping in mind that we are being funded for the purposes of making just enough blockchain to deliver this CRM into a closed, protected firewall network. The security is offloaded to the firewall. All we got to do is make sure we don't accidentally leave on some of the hole punching functionality of IPFS and end up publishing all the customer data to one of IPFS's preload servers out there on the internet somewhere because they were trying to help us distribute our content. And we're like, no, that's the only real thing that I'm concerned about. I have developed a comfort with the, I wouldn't call it the fragility of the system. I'd say that in order for the system to work, given that it is genuinely, truly hash-based and signature-based operation, for it to even turn over at all, it's probably fine.
Right.
If you get what I mean. Like, it's like it either works or it wildly doesn't, because it spits a dummy on like one bit being different. So if it runs at all, you can be pretty sure that it's going to keep running. Like, it's recoverable from error, all that. It's not. It doesn't do those, like with a database is so malleable that you can get these weird runaway errors where you've been writing data for a while, wasn't the data you wanted. It's been overwriting some of the data that it should, and you're like, I don't know where we are anymore, so I'm just gonna call fault and restart the clock. But this is not like that at all.
Right.
This is not like that at all.
Right. If anything, it's the other type of problem where you're probably persisting so much stuff that and like making it so recoverable that somebody might accidentally find things they're not supposed to.
Yeah, on the internet. Like, so yeah. So I'm actually really happy with that. Like, I'm like, I can recover this, and then given that the design of the app is that every browser is intended to take a copy of the entire application, I'm also less concerned about backups because I'm like, well, if something goes wrong, whatever you do not systematically go through each machine and click clear cache. And if you don't do that, I can probably get your data back.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So does it impact security? No. Will it impact security in the future? Absolutely. The huge change for us, or the huge place where we'll have to shift, is once we can get IPFS to consider privacy. Because once we do that, then this ORM is an attack vector whereby if you can get hold of the resolver function, somehow you can start querying for blocks that you shouldn't.
Mm-hmm.
So the ORM needs to be instantiated with a resolver that is capped on where it can resolve to.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you can open everything up. So that's when it does start to impact security.
Okay.
But honestly, like there's something about the design, I don't know how to say it nicely, but the IPFS style model is innately extraordinarily secure. So you'd have to work really hard to thwart it.
I mean, is it? Because I mean, isn't it meant to be publishing everything to everyone all the time?
Yes, I was meaning that so long as you've got it contained,
Right.
the security of like corruption, extraordinarily difficult. Access when you're not allowed, not our problem in this first instance because it's a firewall so long as we don't do any publishing.
Right.
So it's got some fabulous characteristics.
I mean, you don't need to convince me. I've been like kind of dreaming about it.
Yeah, I know. It's what I wasn't trying to pitch it to you. I was just meaning like it kind of like we inherited from when it comes time to actually, hey, we need to make a commercial deployment and get this installed on-prem.
Mm-hmm.
The checklist of like what does the customer need actually a lot of the normally really hard stuff is just like by default for us. So that's been a relief at least. Like data integrity. We could probably have less, to be honest. So yeah, that's, I guess, to summarize, there's a chunk of work to be done to actually take the model system out. What I would like from you is an appraisal of, is the model system even the right thing to be having?
Right.
If it isn't, what is? And what should the design of that model system be? Maybe there's a design out there that can solve a lot of the kinks and problems I'm having, or is my theoretical solution to make it its own independent library sufficient for our purpose?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of like what would the shape of that library really be? All of your domain objects you want to be built on top of the ORM, right?
Yeah. So I've written a crushsystem.md doc where I try to loosely talk about the requirements of this system.
Yeah.
There are much nicer ways to say this, but it's basically how to make a tree of classes that all inherit from a common ORM base instance.
Yeah.
Allow them to optionally, configurably punch holes in the tree where you'd want to have hash-based content that you look up as required, but also allow you to not punch out for efficiencies.
Right. And like
And
who makes that determination?
The author of the code base so I've provided ways for the specifier of a class to indicate what they want to punch out and not punch out. A good example can be found in dmz.js, where under on line 30, from lines 34 to 50 in DMZ.js, the class map specifies what classes that inherit from that ORM base class should each key be mapped to. So when you're hydrating and dehydrating, what are the classes that you expect to be there?
Right.
And then the array, the optional array CID links says which keys do you want to punch out and replace with hashes when you dehydrate. And that implies that any classes that aren't mentioned in the CID links list will not be hashed. They will be treated like a JSON object.
Wait, that sounds backwards to me. They'll be treated like a Pojo, right?
Yeah.
Are those keys not the places where those classes go?
Those keys are the places where the classes go. When you're hydrating, the classes basically store their own properties.
Right.
They look like a Pojo,
right.
but they have inside of them, they have methods and functions for accessing that Pojo information.
Right.
They may also optionally have some private fields that they use for caching or for other implementation specific reasons.
Yeah.
But in terms of what the ORM sees, it sees the entire thing as a Pojo with some developer defined junction points where keys are replaced with a hash, so that when you rehydrate, you need to also fetch that additional hash and rehydrate that hash according to the classes laid out in these two fields.
Right. So can I sanity check myself here?
Yep.
Whenever you're calling something a new class, you're expecting it to be ejectable. Like everything in here is composed of smaller things inside of it, basically, right?
Yeah.
And those things have a class.
Yeah.
And if they have a class, then it's basically like handling its own internal state, and it will be referenced by hash it'll be referenced by hash in the parent.
Optionally referenced by hash in the parent.
Okay.
Optionally.
Yeah.
The catch is, in order for the system to work, it appears that you cannot have a deeply nested object that you want to be persisted to IPFS if you didn't have a continual chain of ORM classes all the way down to it, because otherwise, I guess the system could be more generalized if we actually walked the Pojo and looked for those classes deep in the tree and then dealt with them that way. But maybe that can simplify the solution, where you don't need that continual tree of class inheritance for it to be treated like an ORMable thing.
Yeah. Have you considered building this on TypeScript?
Yeah, I have.
Because I think the thing you're talking about is like more like an interface than a class.
No, it needs some specific functionality, because to rehydrate, you have to provide it with a resolver function that queries IPFS.
Right.
So it's more than just type checking. It's actual functionality that comes into these base classes.
Right, and an interface is too generic, right? There's no implementation for it.
There's no implementation on it, no.
Okay. Okay, yeah, fair enough. So this is already a lot to think about. I'm gonna be drawing some object diagrams and scratching my head for the rest of the day. I think if you, one thing that jumps out to me in the DMZ file that I'm looking at right now is if you're using the CID links to mean like your optional ejection is true and the classes to refer to things that are possibly ejectable,
Yeah.
Like those kind of feel like they belong together. Like when you instance the class, you might pass it a variable or something. I mean, I guess it depends. Like this might just be a bad example because like your path in the structure is using key names that are the same as the like class names that you're passing in as well. Like it's conceivable that the parent would like use different names for everything than the things themselves think they are.
Yeah, that's totally fine too.
Um, in which case, like maybe it makes sense to separate the pathing information from the like instance information, I guess.
It is though. Like,
That's what I'm saying. Like it didn't jump out at me right away when I saw CID links and class map that those are kind of talking about the same thing.
yeah, okay. So if you do not supply the CID links field,
Yeah.
I will assume that everything is meant to be punched out as a CID link based on the class map.
Right.
CID links is only when you have a distinction between those things. But what you were sort of talking about before, where if we actually walked the every Pojo all the way down and just looked for any instance of this base class,
Yeah.
then we can avoid this.
The whole declaration at the beginning of the
Well,
file.
we can just declare CID links
Right.
where you're like, I want to punch out CIDs for these keys only, and then that would carry the assumption that they were ORM base class items.
Yeah. But walking is fine when you're ejecting, but like, does walking work when you're rehydrating?
Totally, yeah, totally. Because the way it gets dehydrated is it's a JSON object with CID, a special CID indicator inserted into it,
Mm-hmm.
and so they call it. Uh, it's like JSON linked data, but their special sort of version for it.
Mm-hmm.
So you can absolutely detect where the links are, and when you find a link and you want to rehydrate it, you need to know what class it's supposed to be. So the parent somewhere, the nearest parent, should tell you what it is. Now, maybe there's another option for being able to specify what paths or what classes at the top level with a class map of sorts. And then, like you leave it up to the system to detect all that. I don't know if that's a better option. Now that I can see all the things I need out of the system,
Mm-hmm.
and I believe I have a complete requirement now, whereas when I started, I was like, maybe I need this, but it feels like I have a complete set of requirements now. Maybe there's other ways to achieve that, such as a top level class map at the root, rather than specifying it all sprinkled throughout.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I'm going to need to sit with this for a bit and just. I understand the question that you're asking me a lot better now. I don't know that I can ask anything else that will make this conversation more clear to me at this moment.
Okay. All right. Well, could we move on to a different topic then?
Yeah.
Multi-threading. It turns out that multi-threading is required in the browser because if we don't, then when you open a new tab of the application, it's going to fail to require lock on the database. And so I have a good idea on how to do the multi-threading, but it's just not done because getting working was a high priority. So I don't know if I guess I'm trying to call out that there's some big areas that are uncertain exactly how.
Right.
Very certain that we do need them for the CRM app to be deployed.
Right.
I don't have a good place to write those down. Maybe you could tell me how that is best communicated.
Like it needs to exist inside the core, right? Like inside the interblock folder.
Yeah. So where to go? I believe that I made a file in W210 engine called scale.
Okay.
Scale.js is where the engine would call for more threads or talk to a thread or start a thread.
Right.
So sort of the interface is stubbed out. I'm more talking about I don't have a good documentation convention for large items that kind of don't get much mention throughout the code base or the tickets, but they're there and they need to happen. As well as I don't have a good place to put principles or unknown parts of principles, like quick unknown questions, like, you know, should we be exposing our internal classes to the developer to use in a pulse, or should we just give them a Pojo?
So I think it needs to be in the repo, is what I'm trying to drive at.
Yep.
I think a lot of these probably should live inside of like a cluster of documentation as close as possible to the intended implementation.
Yeah. Okay.
But then the more general stuff maybe just belongs out in the root, like in some kind of knowledge base folder. So.
Okay.
Or what? I mean, I think you have a docs folder here too.
Yeah.
Docs maybe just needs a little bit more structure.
Yeah.
So like, I think the number one thing that this needs, if anybody is going to be using it in the long haul, is basically some learning material for how it works, right? Like I don't think you're ever going to have a code layout that's like so genius that anyone can just jump in and understand how the code base works. Like people are pretty visual. They want diagrams, they want dictionaries, that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, but that's correct. My opinion is that spending the time on that now, when we're still designing what the actual thing does, it's more important that the two of us have a mental understanding, I think, than right, because we don't know what the final lay of the land is going to be. I think we can say that once we've published this first app, we can say this is the design, this is how it works.
Right. But before we get to the point of saying this is the design, like I don't think there's kind of two levels to the problem of creating this documentation. One is like creating the space that it lives in and the format that you would use to communicate it back and forth, which is what you're asking about right now. And the other is actually filling it in so that it's like comprehensive. I don't want to write comprehensive documentation, even when it's done, if I'm honest. So this docs folder, I think, probably just needs some subfolders. Loosely, kind of, properties, diagrams, knowledge base. Knowledge base I like as a format because it doesn't tie you to like this has to answer some specific question or have some specific format. It's just like notes over time, like almost like a log, Obviously, the main log is the Git commits, but those are not, no matter how hard anyone tries to make them human readable, they're not. I think like the other thing that I want to just say based on having experience working together in the past is like keeping better track of what decisions were made over time. even in like the most loosey goosey fashion possible, like I don't think it's gonna like cause us to be bound to previous decisions that we want to overwrite or anything like that. But I sometimes forget
Okay.
like how it used to look, how we used to talk about it, what we used to think we were trying to get out of it versus
Right.
like where it's at now.
Okay, so how do we combat that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it all comes down to the docs folder. It's just like let's create some folders inside of it that are just like
so docs, what do we got now? All right, so I'll just start making files to represent the broad concepts like principles or problems or design decisions, and then periodically we can come together and try and wring those docs together to squeeze out sort of common bits here and there.
right. What I'm really most interested in is like those big moments where you want to scrap something and go in a completely different direction.
Yeah.
Like being as clear as possible in communicating those.
So like a
Change management basically is what you'd call it, right? Like,
yeah.
so I think like talking about the target that you're trying to hit is one thing, but talking about like why a different direction like was discovered to be the correct way.
Okay, so the art being when is it major enough to warrant that?
Right.
I think I've been pretty good with that by putting them in the dust folder on the website as NFTs, right? So like the IPFS rewrite.
I lost your sound again.
How about now?
Yeah.
Was okay. We're good. I honestly don't know anymore how to work these systems because I got my headphones, but I lost my mouse. I don't know. Anyway, okay, so I'll start with that on the docs folder. to try and sort of keep it together. Keeping in mind that our long-term goal is the operation of the Dreamcatcher.
Yep.
That we have put different things in the Dreamcatcher, like those big sort of changes kind of belong in there. I think like the decision making, I think, belongs in the Dreamcatcher on that website, because it's like, what is this thing you're going to do? Why are you doing it? Why is it worth the resources? Was that
Right.
what you asking about a level down where it's like, why are we thinking about it like this?
Well, I mean, so understanding that, like, mostly to my interest right now is the like interblock project, right? And like, there's been a lot of churn on that project.
Yes, that's the project. That's what it is.
Yeah, I would say I don't think I've witnessed churn in my life that comes even an order of magnitude close to the churn that I've seen on that project. And like, one of the kind of unfortunate truths of getting closer to production is just that, like, you have to start thinking more about like how expensive it is to throw out things that are working, right? This is what you're saying about like, do we carry on with the piece that's wobbling its way through right now?
Yeah.
And I expect there will be like big chunks of ideas thrown out again, right? I just want to make sure there's a hook to like talk about why and how when we do.
That's definitely the Dreamcatcher. The last major change was the IPFS rewrite. That had a. Did you see the document on the website that talked about that?
Probably. I'm on the website right now, so.
Okay, Dreamcatcher and my keyboard has. It's like all of my Bluetooth. It's like you can have your sound and no other Bluetooth functionality. I'm like, this is insane. Why does everything suck so much? And then the thing that really gets me is that I bought this computer from Microsoft, and yet it won't run Windows 11. Okay, so under Live Dust I06 IPFS rewrite, I'll post a link in this chat. If I post it 20 times, that's not my fault. It's because my keyboard. There we go. That's the link.
Okay.
So, for example, that was the last major change, and I can honestly say that everything since then has remained faithful to that plan.
Okay.
There has been no other churn.
Right. Right on. So then I guess, I mean, in the micro sense, in the smaller sense, like, you've worked with, as an example, what you just said is you've worked with the classes long enough to know that like there's a missing piece between them and the code that's consuming them, I guess.
Yeah.
Like, those kind of things will pop up.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, I guess I've been sort of, because the other place I've been putting stuff is in the tickets, right? And I sort of tried to put them there as like a means of saying something a bit more permanent than just a to-do item.
Mm-hmm.
What do we do?
Like,
I could put that. Sorry.
I actually really like the idea of like popping like a stub inside the code and then popping a stub document inside the documentation system. You know, something that like strongly indicates that there's a missing piece here, but like doesn't bind us to any sort of implementation. just like allows for exploration in that area, I guess.
Okay, so why don't how about I'll put a stub in the code and then a stub in the Dreamcatcher.
Mhm.
Because I mean that's work that needs doing.
Right.
Is that like a good compromise? Is it somewhere in the middle? Yeah. Okay. All right. So I'll write up what I think I need about the ORM and say this is how I think it goes. Here's what I'd need that model to be. I don't have time right now. I can't afford the churn. So, but you know, that tension between is it useful and is it not is building.
Yeah, and I mean, there's no way to make that determination until you've done some exploration, right?
Yeah.
You know, adding pieces usually does not make things simpler. Adding pieces usually makes things more complicated, right?
Yeah, this would be taking a piece out and making it its own independent thing. That usually makes things simpler.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, adding an interface, right?
Yeah.
So the other thing you were saying was the multi-threading implementation needs a stub on Dreamcatcher too. Then.
True. Yes, it does. I'll just make notes of these things I have to do.
I kind of like the idea that like speccing something out in public on the Dreamcatcher site it feels right to me.
Yeah, and then it's like, you know, we can sort of debate the merits of the idea, the approach, the cost. How would someone else do it? I mean, that's basically a work package. You know, like, hey, this is a thing that needs doing. There's this much money against it. Have a go. Okay, so that's a little bit of progress on the structure front. Let me think if there's anything. I'll just check my notes in that work plan doc and make sure there's nothing else I really wanted to get across to you. How much more time have you got?
Yeah, like probably 15 or 20 minutes.
Okay. All right. Well, maybe a concept, I guess, is a different. You know, we've spoken about implementation specifics, but then there's also a class of knowledge that would be like concepts and why are things like a certain way. I removed the concept of block height.
Right.
Where would be a good place to talk about that and why that was done?
Right. So I mean, like, we haven't had a public release yet, right? So like nobody is kind of, in my opinion, like anybody looking at this for the first time, like the only reason they would ever expect that to be there is by like reference to a convention that exists in other similar projects, right?
Like, well, every other blockchain has block height.
Right. So like it's one of those things that you can kind of like throw at somebody as like a curveball to help them understand what is the differences in design, right?
Yeah, that's it's weird. Like these kinds of things are stark differences to conventional blockchains, but it lets you start to paint the distinction.
Yeah, so like there is a batch of learning material for people picking this up, right? It doesn't exist yet. It hasn't been written. Like it's probably as important as the code, to be honest.
Important why though?
Why?
Yeah, to who? For what purpose?
Well, so I would. There's two categories of users who would want to pick this up. One is people who've used similar systems in the past and come with their own like preloaded expectation around conventions,
Right.
and the other is people who've never seen anything like this and are like more, I would say, probably malleable in terms of their expectations. Um, I would argue that the first group is probably more important to convert than the second group.
Right, because they already have some use case for Web3 style technologies.
Yeah, they've already been thinking about it. They're looking for a new project. They've hit a snag, like in the framework that they're working on right now.
So basically everyone.
Yeah. The people who are really malleable, like they're harder to convert too, right? Because they're probably trying 50 things at the same time, and they have no idea how to evaluate which one is better than which. Right?
So you're thinking, basically you're thinking there's a group of developers that need that type of knowledge to begin to work with our system on their project.
They don't need it. I just think like people like to be surprised. Their memories work better when they're surprised, right? Like it's a better teaching technique to surprise somebody and then fill them in, right?
Yeah, absolutely. They're like, wait, what? Okay, so what I'm trying to poke at is that the scope of this project could be immense.
Mm-hmm.
We can't afford for it to be immense. We can afford for it to be delivering a single production-ready app to a single customer running a CRM.
Yep.
What would be the best way for us to spend our time to make that happen? Is what I'm still unclear on.
Right. Like until you can insert customer records into a database and have them persist, I would say you probably shouldn't stop working on just writing the code. Right? Like there's like a certain like ring of features here that are absolutely undeniably, like no matter how you cast the word MVP, they must be achieved, right?
Yeah.
Now, like you'll maybe give a counter argument to me here that writing code is not the most efficient way to solve that problem, but
I can't. I could not justify. I could not. That's why I've delayed things like this ORM piece, right? I'm like, it would be great to have, but running headlong towards, hey, we need to deliver this production-ready thing, it doesn't need it.
Right. So it's just Pareto optimization, right? It's like you actually want to leave a certain amount of tech debt at this point now because you're racing for the MVP. So like, in fact, like you will probably from now on for the rest of eternity want to leave a certain amount of tech debt because the last kind of 20% of features are going to take 5 times as long as the other 80%, right?
Yeah. So how do you and I figure out the best place for you to insert your skills and efforts?
Well, I like the idea of that. When you put like stubs, like for right now, the biggest challenge I'm having is like just reading through the whole code base and imagining how all the pieces fit together. I'd really like to make some documents for myself, just like some notes and diagrams possibly,
right.
But like once I've got through that process, I want to just add pieces that are like needed basically, right? So like marking every place where something needs to happen in the code base like allows us to go through those one by one and talk about which ones are needed and which ones are not needed.
Yeah, I guess what I'm looking for is for a cleaner way to have you look at the problem, as opposed to right now you are looking at the solution or an attempt at the solution.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is the CRM app, and I'm not convinced I've been able to frame that. Like once you have that problem in mind, then that can more easily guide your opinions and decisions on what to do and when to do it and how to do it, right? Like that's sort of what I'm fumbling at. is we don't have that piece communicated, I don't think.
So are there requirements for this app? Or is this another one of those situations where, like, you've started dealing with somebody that wants you to write the requirements for the thing that they want you to build that you suggested that they might want?
Let me just pull you up a site. I'm going to send you there's already a site that's been made for them that
Right.
I made many moons ago. I'll just put that in the link, and I'll send you a password for it. Yeah, actually, this is probably the best place to start now that I think about it. Yeah, I'm sorry to be fumbling around. I don't have a clear-cut idea of how to. I mean, I'm asking questions that I actually genuinely don't know the answer to and need to figure out. I know that for sure you can help. I just don't know exactly where. That's all. All right, I'll just give you a password to that site.
I don't take it as fumbling. I want to be able to add value. Like, I'm not here to. There's a lot of claims on my time, you know?
Yeah, I know. And trust me, they will get worse. They do not get better. Like, oh, that man has slaved enough. Let's leave him alone.
What's the username?
The username is the short word, and the password is the big word. If you can, just keep in mind for the live streams that I'm trying to avoid talking about this specific customer until they're happy for us to do so. It's more about just the generic CRM app. This is their genuine customer data. So this is the thing we must not leak.
Okay.
Including on screenshots or anything like that. So
all right.
Yeah.
So I see like people records.
Yep. Okay. And if you go to the routing tab, you can see these colored items are the sectors or the way that they group their customers. Each sector is served by a truck.
Okay.
And then on the left-hand side in the routing tab, you'll see the numbered list of addresses that indicate the order in which the truck should travel. Now, our system is intended to so if you go back to the customers tab and click on, I think maybe, let me just try the first one. If you click on the first customer, which should be number 015072,
yeah,
then you'll see there that they have like a product listed.
Don't see that.
It says product for weekly.
I don't.
Sorry. Did you click on view customer?
Okay. Yes, now I see it.
Yeah. So basically, all the customers have these products lined up against them. They're technically a service, but whatever. The service dictates who gets picked up on what days, because it's not everybody every day. And so the job of this app is to primarily allow all the customers to be put in order for the truck to drive past and then to generate a list that is specific to each date for the specific truck on this day to go around to these addresses in this order, and then to bill the customer for the successful collections once the truck has returned and has its manifest reconciled with this system. And then to email out invoices for the customers. Now, that's a full range of functions that I am convinced if we can do that on this blockchain, there's a vast number of other apps that are simpler than this that you can do.
Right.
And so if I could talk a little bit about where the blockchaininess actually becomes useful in this design.
Sure.
So one of the big time, this is a business that operates on the principle of very large numbers of customers at a very low price. And so anytime that the customer actually interacts with the business for any kind of exception or problem, costs a lot of money, because the price has to be low. So the cost of even them making one phone call doesn't really, you'd rather avoid that. And so being able to make a customer portal where they can come in and make their own modifications, like, hey, I'm going on holiday, I need a pause. Hey, I'd like to increase my frequency. Hey, whatever. Being able to do it online saves a lot of time. And so the way that the blockchain nature helps us there is that we can make the customer's blockchain record directly available to them once they've proven who they are. And so it allows sort of us to treat them like a dedicated entity, as opposed to a bunch of table joins. So there's that aspect. Every customer is a dedicated collection of blockchains. Some of those chains are shared with the customer through the customer portal. When they edit it, it shows as them editing it in what I hope will be an event log held under the events tab, which when completed will show you in order every change that happened to the system and by whom at what time, so that you can, once you've got thousands of customers coming in and making modifications, you could easily look at this stream of events and see what's odd, see who changed what, see what your staff have been modifying, all of that. Because in the blockchain based system, it's kind of easy to track individual changes through history and report them back. Whereas a traditional app would actually need that stream designed in from the start, or it would be very difficult to produce. Plus, recreating what the state of the app was at a previous point in history is a no-go for a conventional app. Whereas,
is there contention in this model that recovering to previous states would be useful?
Yeah, because first of all, there may be some kind of error or some kind of attack that occurred, or some kind of rogue actor. Also, recovering to a certain point and running a fork of the app for training purposes to say, how would you handle this situation? Us doing troubleshooting and bug shooting, like how did it get from this state to this one, is useful.
I only ask because I'm glad to hear the event tab as being pitched as the most useful part of the application.
Well, this was the thing that the customer's actually really excited about, because that's a big paranoia for someone who signs up to a SaaS application and then lets their customers make modifications. It's like, how do I know who changed what?
Right.
And then what I've also added in this site, I'll try and pull it up. Or show a good version of it. If you go to, hang on, where the hell are we? Oh yeah, if you go to the routing tab, and then you click on versions at the top left, it's blank now, but the idea is that, see, these sectors are a complex thing to draw. Like, it takes a lot of time, and sometimes you want to change them seasonally. So versioning of the sectors comes for free using the blockchain model, and then you can roll back and forwards depending on what you want to see. Like, you want to roll back to last summer and then make some more changes, or
Right.
you want to see what you want to step back in time and see what you changed. It's like Google Docs history, but it's there for everything.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
without having to really build that in and slave for that feature. It's something that you merely need to surface rather than think about,
Right.
because the whole app is state by state. The inverse is true. The inverse of history is future. And that's an interesting one, because if all of our history was done in these discrete steps, that makes it much easier for us to suggest what you might like to do as your next step. Right? So we can actually, as sort of a future expansion, start to add these helpful hints that are like, every other time you did this next.
Right.
Is today different? You know, like designing it in the DOS framework, which I think is the biggest point of this whole thing, is not the blockchain, it's that DOS framework. It has a lot of benefits. And I could rant all day about the benefits of designing in that model, but one of them is that you can have basically generic bolt-on intelligence, because the whole app was made in this discrete state transition model. And then if you have thousands of instances running and you get a big data set, saying what comes next, given that there's a defined set of transitions that are allowed to come next, and you've got a whole history of different choices that were made, suggesting the next thing in a generic way becomes sort of not as big a deal as it would be in a conventional app, where if you want intelligence, it's going to have to be custom made, because your entire app was custom made. So how would anyone really know how to make generic intelligence for you? So that's kind of the longest term view that I have at the moment on where to go with this. But yeah.
I mean, okay, so like what I would say is it doesn't seem to, the very core of this thing is basically the list of customers, right?
Correct.
I think there's probably a lot of different directions you could head as soon as you've managed to like stamp a giant list of customers down in a persistent way.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know, from there, like you have all of the, like, how does the client work? Like, how do you actually view the data? How do you modify it? Like, how do you model who's allowed to change what, basically, right?
Mm-hmm.
All of those are kind of the next ring of questions, in my opinion, beyond just like, can I get this data like loaded into the system?
Yep.
I think it's pretty easy to use, can I get this data loaded into the system, as like a decision-making tool for what's important to focus on right now.
So that is the milestone that I'm trying to hit. And it's basically, can I get it imported in a reasonable time frame?
Mm-hmm.
Turned out to be the extra hitch that needed to be added, because first time I went to import it, 2.5 hours. And I was like, is that okay? Probably not. Got that down to 15 minutes or so in the last implementation. Very hopeful for this one being faster than that. It could be sub 1 minute, but again, that's tech debt that I plan to leave accrued, because making a highly efficient importer
just isn't on the main line to getting this app published.
Yeah, that's right. I would say, for me right now, like what feels like the most instructive direction is like I want to play around with just any data existing on the system. How do I look at it? How do I get it back? Like,
Right.
So I'd like to see something kind of like a block explorer, but not so heavy, right? Like just something where I can inspect data, basically, right? I think
so
like
DOS has the blocks command.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that's working yet, but if you turn on the IP log debug flag, then you will get a block inspector that every time there's a new block made, it will write to console a pretty formatted summary of what that block is.
Right.
That's probably the most useful tool that I have for seeing inside the system right now.
Right.
My intention for the first iteration of this app is going to be the console version running in the browser, where you can only really browse using console commands like ls, cat, cd, those types of things. And then from there, I'll re-enable the WebDOS framework, which is a set of generic components that looks at the DOS structure and then rolls out React components based on that.
Right. Okay. So that seems like a fine short-term roadmap. Like I will need your help telling me like what is the best place for me to focus getting there. Like I'm at fundamentals right now, right? In terms of actual running code.
Yep. Also, please don't underestimate the benefit to me to explaining it to you. Like that's a huge benefit to me. It helps me see it clearer, makes me realize things that are a bit crap and maybe could be a bit better. So I find that very useful as well.
Right. And I also thought like during this process, probably the most value that I can provide is like a list of things that would have helped me learn it easier.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that's something you want to sideline right now while you're on the sprint to the app, but like
I'd love to have it, because I mean those are very easy things to just read. Like if I'm walking down the street and I'm like, oh, she'll read this little list of things that Ben wished and be like, yeah, that's a great idea. Something like those are very helpful things. So this site I showed you is basically the spec.
Okay.
It's a great spec because it's a working app, but it's like do this but blockchain, and so what the customer is really interested in is the fact that the trouble with the trucks is that they have poor connectivity.
Right.
So being able to have a blockchain version that handles that synchronization seamlessly, that's a big deal. And a conventional app doesn't do that well at all. And so hopefully the end game for this customer is that we can remove their server, we can remove their high quality internet connection, and they can basically run their entire business on a set of cell phones and tablets sitting in the trucks.
Okay.
And they can take customer calls on their cell phone. They can basically abandon base and just roam. Take their whole business roaming. The blockchain handles all the data integrity and synchronization. The customers can connect directly.
So a big question for me there then is how much do you want to prioritize the ease of instancing a new node on the system? Because it seems to me like that kind of goal, if it's a huge arcane process to fire up like a new node in the project, that it's going to
no. Look, I just want to get deployed, right? I want to get deployed is the main goal. So right now there's a single instance running on their server. That is the Node.js instance. That is the authoritative validator. There are no other validators. The browser versions simply connect to it, and then they receive the data. There's a single privacy domain.
Right.
If you're in the local network, you can see all the data, nothing secret from you. Changes or write permissions are something that needs to be implemented to only allow some members to write to some areas. But even like the day one launch is going to be just everyone can do anything. Don't break it or I'll find you.
Right. So maybe I have the wrong mental picture here, but like the way you've talked about data ingress into the system,
Right.
Like you're basically a validator for your like proxy self in the system. Like everybody needs to run a node. There's many validators on the system. It's all, I understand, all proof of authority, but
right. Okay, so for the actual CRM app, there's a single authoritative validator.
Right.
On each browser. Each person is a browser for their own shell chain, which is how they navigate around the app, and they are connected back to the app complex that's running on the Node.js server.
Right.
So they are in charge of making the chain that creates the right request that then gets connected into the Node.js instance.
Right. I guess my question still stands. Like, how much of a pain in the ass in terms of setup are you like? Are people willing to tolerate for? I think like the way you've just described it. If my shell chain is sending commands into the app, it will like keep itself running even if there's like splits in the network, right? Because your actions will just be in an outbound pending queue until you come back into connection, right?
Right. Yep. Right. Okay. So the connectivity thing is not being dealt with us in stage one.
Right. Okay.
So it's basically we're dealing with office workers sitting on premise in the building with LAN connectivity to the server. They fire up Chrome browsers. Those browsers connect directly to the Node.js server to get the latest version of the app. When they want to write, their browser chain makes the next block that signals that they want to make the write, and it waits until the app has received that write block and updated the app complex, and then it shows up for them.
Okay. Oh boy.
Can you just give me 1 second?
Yeah.
Okay, back. Hey there.
Hello.
All right. Hey.
So maybe something that would be useful is like who are the users, like just a description of who are the users and like what are the kind of end-to-end processes that they're expecting.
Okay, so
as a piece of documentation, I mean.
Well,
you've just described it.
It's running in this app.
Yeah. Yeah, you've just described it to me.
Like, okay. Sorry, are you asking me for a document? Or?
No, I'm just trying to suggest something else that might be valuable to try and get down. Like not like a full spec or anything like that, but just the set of interactions that like we need to build.
So actors and actions.
Yeah.
Okay. I think the best way to spec that is with the writing it as the schema of the API for the app.
Okay.
Chain. So basically, here's the list of actions and the fields within each action, and then in there is a description field. So in that description field, I can say sort of why things have to be a certain way.
Right.
Maybe?
Yeah, that sounds fine. I think from there, like you can expand out on that pretty easily to like what kind of functionality undergirds it, right?
Sorry, what do you mean?
Like, sort of the way that I've been trying to do it recently is I'll do a really coarse-grained sequence diagram for complicated like synchronization problems, right?
Right.
Like not going into a ton of like back and forth detail like handshakes and negotiations and whatever other kind of things need to go on, right? But like then from there, like you can get more fine grained. Like you basically just say actor X does something to system Y at this time, right? And like those single arrows just sort of become more and more like back and forths as you figure out like what are the chunks of the system that sit underneath of them. I'm not describing what I mean very well. Sequence diagrams are super helpful in my opinion.
Yeah, hang on. I think I've got something that actually does what you want. Let me just try to pull it up. Here, this is the higher up. You can also see a state chart that describes how those actors interact with the overall system as well. But here is just a description of 4 actors and all of the actions that they're capable of triggering.
Okay. Yeah, because this works as a spec for the application, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's funny. I was looking at that one already. Okay, so like I can try to scratch that out based on what I've seen in the application here too. Unless you've already done that.
I haven't done that at all, actually. I have been winging it for the CRM app, just based on sort of fiddling around with, I'm really just trying to get the basic data import going.
Yeah. You can just save one record and recall one record, right? Like.
Yeah. Okay, well that's good then. I should actually work towards specking out what the CRM does a bit more in order to allow you to see the problem clearer.
Right. You get what I mean? Is like inside of one really coarse grained, like, person at like management console, like clicks on customer X and like pulls up their record. Like that's a really like bulk description of a lot of little tiny things that are happening, right?
Yeah.
So
the actors and actions is definitely my preferred method for describing that, and even more precisely, I would prefer to write a test that was a script of these actions being dispatched.
Yeah.
So I could describe a user story, for lack of a better term, as a choreographed series of actions coming from different actors, and then assertions about the resulting state.
Yeah, that's great. I guess like even the idea of an actor in this system is kind of synthetic, right? Like you can fake actors even.
Yeah, well, that's one of the benefits I think of this DOS framework approach, is that you can script it out in a meaningful way that's sort of very close to English, and then write a test case that will look very similar to the English description. So, you might even start with that as the spec.
Yeah, it's great.
So yeah, it's as much this test is a whole lot of things. The CRM has to be up and running. That's what the funding's for. How to get there is sort of via the DOS framework using this blockchain. How much of that we need to build out at each stage, I guess, is the balancing act.
Yeah, I mean, it might also. What I'm trying to say is like, you can use your high level view of actors and actions as like a filter for features that matter. It's what you're doing in your head
Yes.
anyway when you're thinking this through. But like, if if you took a step here, like worker proposed contract, worker revoked contract, and fund the idea, like each one of those is going to be like 20 things under the hood of like this thing, like this
Yeah.
code unit talks to that code unit, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
If we can have that mapping somehow, like it'd be easy to figure out what actually needs to be built, and even in what order. But the problem is that the pieces don't exist yet, right?
Right. So the place we should try to get to first is being able to run an integration test that has a choreographed set of steps. We'll just pick a simple story first.
Yep.
Like
update custom.
The first one would be import accounting database.
Right.
Select customer number X. Update field Y. Update name field to blah blah blah. Assert customer count is this. Assert customer name is this. Assert customer count, like that kind of script, and then work backwards from there to say, well, what in the blockchain needs to be there to enable that thing to work, right? Right.
So like for sure you need to pool actions, you need to send them, you need to like block them. Like those are the basics that everything needs, right?
Yeah. But then there's like so that would be good for describing or explaining why we need this search function, right? Like admin or staff searches for customer 157.
Yep.
And then 157 is retrieved. Assert there are 5 possible customers that start with 157. Select one, like those types of scripts, because then you're like, oh yeah, I see now that the blockchain needs to be able to search all customers.
Right.
For that to even have a hope of completing.
For sure. I mean, if there's there are basic functions that exist on the current internet that like you need to not make impossible, for sure.
Okay.
But
all right. Well, that's cool, because that's like the that's the start of the stable crisp testing framework for the CRM, so that we can make changes and expansions and then always know that we're stable.
Yeah, and the other thing is like it's really, really, really useful learning material, right? Because like you can teach people like this is what a high level view on building an application is, and like this is all the steps that are involved, and this is how we've chosen to do those steps, and and then the here's why is like something you can tack on very easily there to help people understand like the intent of the design decisions in the application.
Yeah, design intent.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well that's so basically I'll prioritize by I've got a mother of a commit due soon, which is like all the test passing again and the web thing working with IPFS doing persistence and back. I expect that to be this afternoon.
Right.
Then I will move on to, should I try and make this first spec for the CRM to do the exercising in an automated sense?
Yeah, I mean, even just as a point of agreement and alignment, it's useful, right? Like it doesn't need to be runnable to be useful, right?
Totally. Okay. Yeah. All right. Cool. I'll move on to that afterwards then. So I'll put that in the work plan document. It would be spec for basic CRM functions. Yeah. Okay.
I need to jump off.
Yep, sure. Me too. Okay.
I need to jump off because I just need to do my last half hour of work for the day.
Yeah, no worries. All right. We'll be in touch. Thank you very much.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Tom.
See you later.